Hello again everyone and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. People who have walked through a forest at night and had a scary experience, what happened? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I was a teenager and at a weekend camp. We were playing a flashlight tag game and I was running and hiding rather than seeking. I'd been sneaking around a lot and bailing into the bush if the younger kids came near. It made it more fun if the leaders moved, so the kids had more of a chance. This one time, I was just about caught by a group and jumped into an area of brush. As soon as I landed, I heard someone else shift and heard their breathing. I whispered, "Sorry, I didn't know you were here." They didn't answer. I waited with them for almost a minute in silence, aside from our breathing, while the kids went a different way. I said, "We can probably head off now," and started to go. The other person also left, rustling through the brush the other way without saying a word. So, while I don't know what I was hunkered down with, it was bigger than a raccoon and smaller than a full-grown bear. Maybe a baby bear or a coyote. No idea, but it was kind of freaky after. A couple of years ago, I loaded a bunch of camping gear onto my bicycle and spent the better part of the next 7 months riding 5,300 miles, 8,500 kilometers around the US. Most often at night, I would choose to wild camp, simply finding somewhere to disappear into the woods, somewhere other people were unlikely to find me, and even less likely to care that I was there. I was quickly getting used to the sounds of the forest at night. Crickets and toads, the wind through the trees, maybe the babbling of a nearby creek. It was always a highlight of the night, though not particularly uncommon to hear the distant yips and howls of coyotes, and one of my favorite moments of the whole trip was falling asleep to the sound of 2 owls, one at either end of my tent, hooting back and forth through the night. One night in late September, I was camping somewhere in the remote mountains of western Montana, and it was dead silent. There was not a single sound to be heard. It can only be described as the loudest silence I've ever heard, and it felt as though the entire forest was hiding from an equally silent predator. Suddenly, the occasional snapping of a twig, a common sound normally lost in the cacophony of other noises, sounded like the crack of a gunshot. It was incredibly unnerving, and I could not get out of there soon enough come morning. When I was 16, I and a friend walked through the woods around 1:30 in the morning in the boonies off of Michigan for fun. We took off a few joints with us, and off we went. We stumbled across a section in the woods with all sorts of weird shit set up in a small opening. A car smashed into a tree with all the limbs and vines growing through it, old tables and chairs scattered about, huge piles of broken glass and ceramic, a bunch of random junk everywhere. We were puzzled as to what it was all doing out there in the middle of the woods. Then we heard a crunch on a branch and something stepping on the leaves out of the woods toward us. I can't say it wasn't an animal because we couldn't see, but the pace sounded eerily human, and we sprinted out of there so fast I still don't think there was a time I've run faster in my life. I was a scout, and we had a night game. We were dropped somewhere random and had to walk back to HQ without getting caught by our leaders. If so, you were sent back to the start location. My group was walking in the forest. We were far away from the path. When we came to an edge of the forest, there was a low, barbed wire fence for horses or cows. We were trying to see if any animals were in the field, but it was so dark we could only see like 3 meters or 9 feet ahead. Then suddenly, a man made a screaming and growling noise right behind us. We all panicked and started jumping over the fence. We were running to the other side of the field when out of nowhere, a big group of cows came racing at us from the left. We all just scream and run as hard as we can to get out of the field. We just ran till we got to the road. Later at HQ, we asked another group that wasn't far behind us if they were the ones that screamed. They said that they thought it was us. There was a grown man at like 1 to 2 a.m. in the forest, not even close to the path. that was not a sane person. We used to catch fish at my grandparents' cabin near the Canadian border, and we would have a dumping ground for the guts of the fish we caught. This was probably 250 yards into the woods, far away from the cabin, so we wouldn't attract bears with other scavengers near our place where we were staying. I was 11 years old and was tasked with dumping the guts. It was dusk, and I headed into the woods when I took a wrong turn. I realized this and headed back to the main trail when all of a sudden it was getting dark. I don't have a flashlight or phone on me, so I kept walking down the trail, and I find the dumping ground. So here I am. It's almost pitch black, except for the moon, and I smell rotting fish guts when I hear a large animal, probably 20 feet away from me in the woods. I slowly walk down the trail, and when I get on the main road, I book it back to the cabin. The next day we find cougar tracks at the fish dumping ground. To this day, I still am terrified of the woods at night. It was seriously a traumatic experience. Not walking, but mountain biking, I have a couple of LED lights for night riding, a wide floodlight on my handlebars, and a narrow beam spotlight on my helmet. I'm in Florida and was riding through a swampy jungle when I noticed the trail was covered with these little, sparkly, shiny emerald green things. I assumed they were crystals like quartz or something, except that the trails are mostly sand and shouldn't have anything like that. So I decided to stop and see what the reflection was. And it was light reflecting back from the eyes of a giant wolf spider. The trail is covered with spiders. Literally. Hundreds and hundreds of them. And those are only the ones facing me. Another time, on the same trail, I was flying down a long straight forward, and up ahead I could see a pair of eyes on the trail reflecting back at me. They were low to the ground, so I thought they were a raccoon or possum or something. As I got closer, they started to rise up and up some more, until there were, it seemed, as a tall person. Just as the creature got into range of my spotlight, it turned around and bolted into the trees. I only saw its back in my spotlight for a moment, but whatever it was big and covered in medium brown hair. I'm guessing it was a deer, but I'm not sure, and I wasn't sticking around to find out. My friends and I loved to urban explore around our hometown of New Orleans in high school and early college. And by that, I mean we just hop in the car and drive with no destination, end up somewhere interesting looking, then get out and walk around. I've got a couple of stories, but this one still stands out in my mind. One night, a friend of a friend took us to a secret beach, which required walking over a hill past these train tracks, then through a small patch of woods. It was a small sandy beach with overturned trees as benches. It had a view of the Mississippi River, and you could watch the large riverboats running up and down it. There were signs of people having been back there at some point. There was trash scattered about, but we thought it was so cool and started a little fire pit out there and everything. He then told us about a ship graveyard. That was a short hike through the woods. He showed us the way, and it was so neat. You trekked through this footpath, then climbed up this large dirt hill with giant pieces of metal jutting out of it to get back to the main attraction. It was basically the corpses of old ships in all manners of positions, as well as multitudes of old, large shipping crates. It seemed, maybe at one point, it was some kind of docking station, but had since long been abandoned. In the dead center of it was a small building that looked as if it had been an office or something. Then, there was a large metal structure made of tubes near a huge overturned ship. Like the ship had sunk into the mud, and the front end was sticking straight up into the sky. It was wild. We walked around and noticed some of the crates were open, but none of us went to look inside. There was also graffiti on some of them, plus the building in the middle, which read the Rabbit Hole, and had a bunny tagged on it. After maybe half an hour of walking around, we climbed out of the ship graveyard, walked back to the secret beach, smoked a couple of cigarettes, and then went home. A few moments later, a tropical storm hit. The following weekend, I wanted to impress this girl like at the time and suggested our group of friends hanging out that night go back to the beach since most of them hadn't seen it. We went back, and it was almost totally reconstructed just from the tropical storm. The log seats were moved about, the fire pit we had built was gone, and the path to the ship graveyard was a mess of debris and fallen trees and branches. We hung out on the beach, and I asked the group if they wanted to see the ship graveyard. We had to take a weird alternate route through the woods from the normal path because the main footpath was still flooded over. We got to the back, and the climb up the dirt hill was a trek. It was sloppy and muddy, and the metal struts to climb in were sliding around. It was much more difficult than before, but we made it to the other side, and everyone was astounded, and we walked around a bit. We found these giant fire extinguishers, and they worked. We sprayed them around, and were loud. We ended up walking over to the rabbit hole building, and one of my friends climbed to the roof of it to see if there was a way inside. Almost as soon as he reached the top, he quickly scaled down and came back around and whispered, "Someone is back here with us," and pointed toward this metal tube structure next to the overturned ship. And sure enough, there was. Someone tall and large, rocking back and forth on the tube structure. Then we noticed there was a blanket or something hanging from the ship, as if he had climbed up and was squatting there. The girl I was trying to impress was suddenly very unimpressed, and we made our way back to the dirt hill. We turned around and both the person and the blanket were gone. We proceeded to freak the fuck out and started to move faster. As we got to the top of the hill, we could see him walking past the rabbit hole. A few of us got cuts and scrapes trying to climb the metal structures in the mud, but we were so in a panic we didn't even notice till later. We went the original way we came, away from the foot route, and I don't think any of us had ever felt a walk took that long to get back. We only whispered to each other as we moved, and when we got back to the beach, we took off past the train tracks, got into my car, and peeled out. To this day, I'm not sure who was back there or why they were silently following us out, but it definitely was terrifying. We never went back. I know this sounds like a bad creepypasta, but I assure you, it's true. Years ago, when my grandma passed away, we had to go from one side of the U.S. to the other ASAP for the funeral. Now, we got to Oklahoma real late one night of the drive, and my folks stopped at the only motel available. I don't remember the name or place, but it was like time forgot it or something. Old cabin, log buildings, and it backed up to a forest area that had initially been partly cleared to make the road connect to the interstate. It didn't happen, and nature was reclaiming the road slowly. Well, my folks went to sleep, and my brother and I went for a walk down a path that was semi-asphalt and semi-overgrown. It led to a dead end, where you could see the highway about a mile away in the dark. We walked about a mile max and smoked a joint on the way. But my brother said it was time to head back, and we started off, and I, being a lightweight, started chuckling and chatting on the walk back. He grabbed my arm hard as shit and looked in my face seriously and we kept walking, all the while making eye contact with me and darting his eyes left to right and walking quick but not running. We made it to the clearing at the motel parking area, and I walked up to the nearest stair, and I jogged up and looked down and saw my brother staring at a humongous white wolf thing. He walked backwards slowly, and the thing eventually trotted off like a horse. It was that big. It was super mangy and had hair patches missing, and could tell it was hungry as shit. We probably made it back just in time. We still talk about it to this day nearly 20 years later. By the way, my bro is tough as nails, and I'm dedicated and hardworking, but kind of a pushover in the outdoorsman area. I was walking through a small patch of green space in my boyfriend's neighborhood with them. We were in high school at the time. It was late, maybe 10 p.m., and there were no lights in the forest, only light bleeding through the trees from a nearby street. The trees were thick and tall, and there were a few old growth stumps from old logging. We knew the paths well, so we weren't concerned about getting lost. We were careful to keep an eye out for coyotes and skunks, but as we walked, something big and dark flew over our heads. We looked around and couldn't see anything. We kept walking and it happened again. This time we saw it land in a tree. It was an owl, fairly big, maybe a barn owl, maybe larger. It followed us for a while, swooping over our heads. It felt supernatural to be being followed by an owl. But later, when we talked about it, we figured it was hoping we would flush a mouse or something as we walked. I have a rather big forest close to my home. Nothing special about it, neither creepy nor mystical, and not pretty as well. Just a forest with trees, bushes, and so on. I used to go there a lot with my dog since it was so conveniently close, and he would run around on his own while I was minding my own business. Around 2 or 3 years ago, I went there rather late, probably around 9 p.m. when it started to get dark soon, but I still wanted to go for a short walk. I always stay on the track so I don't disturb any wildlife or damage the plants. As it's getting later and darker, I'm somewhat in the middle of the woods, but I felt all good since I know every small track there, and I always would find my way back home. As I'm walking, I hear some weird noises rather close to my left. I couldn't make out what it was, but it sounded like a mixture of hissing and spoken words, but definitely nothing I've ever heard before. It didn't sound like anything earthly, as stupid as that might sound. Then my dog comes bursting out of the bushes, his tail clamped between his legs, totally focused on me and desperate to get going. He knew there was something weird going on. As I try to calm him, I take a look into the woods, and there, maybe 20 feet or meters from me, I see a pair of deep red eyes staring at me. No movement, no blinking or anything. They just stare right at me. I'm struck and somewhat can't really move, but I keep staring into those eyes. They were seriously red. I don't know how to describe it, but again, nothing I've seen before. I knew that something was there that didn't belong there, but I don't know what it was. It was like I was dreaming a very eerie feeling, and the air was dry and crisp as hell, and I felt really calm for some reason, and just told my dog to follow me and went away slowly. I never looked back, but I know for sure that if I had looked there, the eyes would still have stared at me. After a couple of meters, I suddenly wake up from my trance, and I just hit it. I'm full speed running with my dog through that forest, scared out of my mind, and I'm crying big time while I'm running. I don't even know why and what really happened, but everything just felt so freaking wrong, and I just wanted to get as far away as possible from this place. To this day, I don't know what I saw there that night, and I don't think I really want to find out, to be honest. The only animals that live in that forest are deer and boars, but the eyes were at human face height, so somewhat between 1.5 meters and 2 meters in height. Never stepped foot into that forest again, but I haven't heard of anything weird going on there as well. I was in Louisiana at the time, having moved from Arizona. The deep forest, or Fort Polk, were amazing to me. I went out one day and spent several hours just walking through and examining things. Before I knew it, the sun had gone down, and I couldn't find my way out. I started to panic and ran in circles like you see in the movies. I heard shuffling in the trees and stopped and held my breath. A loud grunt was let out before a bunch of twigs broke under the weight from something heavy. It was a hunter sitting in a tree blind. He climbed down from the tree to help me out of the woods after hilariously watching me panic and run by him several times. My friend at the time had taken me along to one of her annual family camping trips. I was excited but nervous because I'm not used to being in the woods, and they're always kind of creep me out despite their beauty and whimsy. One night we decided to go swimming at the beach while every other camper was at their camp. We decided to hang out at the nearby playground afterwards. When we started heading back, we had to walk through the beach parking lot, which was surrounded by forest. Anyway, I'm a bit nervous and anxious to get back to our camp, and my friend is reassuring me that she's come to this campground all her life and nothing has ever happened. The most crimes take place in cities. Just as she finishes her sentence, we hear this laugh in the woods, like a high-pitched witch's laugh. It went like, hee 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 hee. We bolt right out of there. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever heard. She wasn't easily scared, and it freaked her out too. Later, she didn't even like talking about it. It freaked her out so bad. It definitely could have been a nearby camper that might have overheard us and decided to freak us out. We weren't talking too loud though. Even so, I'll never forget that. If it was a person messing with us, I have to say, they have a good sense of humor. I experienced this overpowering silence once when my friends and I snuck into a park after midnight to drink on the fields. We were 17 and in high school, so the best we could do were a couple of bottles of Bacardi and E&J. This park is by a main road that is frequented, but it's a huge park that spans multiple zip codes and is one of the biggest in the 5 boroughs of New York. The park is full of shortcuts and paths not frequented even during daylight. So my friend and I are on our way to meet some girls at a further end of the park, so we naturally decide to take a shortcut. Before we made our way through the tunnel, we noticed a triangle shape a little further out, and as we got close, we realized it was a tent with food and needles all around it. And to make matters worse, it was empty. At this point, we just look at each other and nervously laugh it off. We pick up the pace a bit, and at this point we're jogging to the destination. Maybe 10 to 12 seconds later, all the noise in the park just stops. And I mean complete stop. No crickets chirping, frogs croaking, mosquitoes buzzing, or rustling of bushes could be heard. At this point, we panic and just full-on sprint down this windy path. I, being fat as shit, obviously trail behind, but I've never run faster in my life than that day. We finally got to the top of the hill and told the girls what happened, and they said, "Yeah, let's not do this again." It was probably the one time I felt true fear and had a fight or flight instinct. Honestly, the tent wasn't even the scariest part. That silence was unnatural, and my friends got shaken up talking about it. The park is right across from a mental institution as well, to make matters worse. If you're from Queens, you know which park I'm talking about. I think I do. Walking to my bow hunting stand early AM around 3:30 to 4 AM. It was dead silent, no moon. I could hardly see where I was stepping, and I spooked a deer that, oddly enough, must have been sleeping. It was in a field of dry underbrush and tall grass I was walking right next to. Woods were on my right, but they surrounded the whole field, curling left around it up ahead of me. It was a buck for sure, which supports the theory that it was sleeping and not just frozen in place, too scared to bolt until the last second. He was literally 4 to 5 feet away from me before he booked. He blew, snorted, and crashed through the field, making so much noise and doing it all so quickly it made me snap 90 degrees to the left to face toward the noise, jolt my bow and my free arm up in the air, and bellow out a huge, "Oh my God," which echoed quite loudly into the woods around the field, making me feel like a cowardly dumbass at the time. The truth is, you don't know what it's really like until you've actually been there. A remote, wild forest in the dead of night takes some getting used to. Being alone, totally out of your environment, your main senses almost useless in the environment you're in, with all the unknown potentially inhabiting it, is one of the spookiest things in the realm of the natural world a modern human can experience. I will also say, as someone who's hunted like this for decades and been in the woods at night more times than I can count, there are things I've seen out there that I don't understand, that I can't explain, and that my experience in life tells me I shouldn't have seen. And that's all I'm going to say. So I was camping in the boondocks of northern Michigan a few weekends back on my buddy's property, and I've had an experience that has stuck with me since. We were on a 7-acre woodland plot, and nearest neighbor is roughly 2 to 3 miles away. Throughout the night, our group, made of 4 people, could hear coyotes yipping around the property, some sounding as close to 10 to 15 meters away. In the middle of the night, I woke up 3 times to the sounds of coyotes outside of the tent and something rubbing against the tent side. My partner sleeps like the dead and didn't wake up once. Meanwhile, I had a very vivid dream that I had walked around to the back of our tent, which was in a little clearing on the edge of the woodline. As I stood there, I watched as a coyote emerged from the brush. It looked at me and I looked at it. It wasn't menacing or frightening, but it was like we were acknowledging each other. As I looked at the coyote, 2 more emerged from the woodline, and they continued to lock eyes with me. I was never afraid of them, but it was almost like they saw through me. I woke up the next morning to my partner shuffling through their bag, and I told him about the dream. It was just one of those dreams that feels real, you know? I then went to get up from my cot and realized that I still had socks on. Ever since I remember, I've never been able to fall asleep with my socks on, let alone not kick them off in my sleep. And when I went to grab my boots, they were on the opposite side of the tent from where I left them the night before. My partner insists that they didn't move them. I can't help but feel that my dream wasn't actually a dream and that I was actually walking with the coyotes that night. I was coon hunting once with a friend, and our dogs started to tree right next to an abandoned junkyard. Upon approaching the tree, the dogs took off. Every time we got close with our lights on, the dogs would take off again. Eventually, they were running down a fence row in an open field, so we knew whatever was going on was about to stop, as the trees ran out about midway through the field. Mind you, this was after about 2 miles of constant swearing and questioning why the dogs were doing this. We got to the final tree, and the dogs took off again. But this time, they took a hard right into the standing cornfield, and what I can only describe as the most horrendous noise I've ever heard a dog make started coming from the field. And it was loud, and both dogs started screaming the same. Made all of the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then we heard it, a woman-like scream that I've only heard a few times in my life. The dogs had managed to run down one of the only bobcats I'd ever come across where we live, and it tore up both of those dogs, and they hightailed it back to the road a bloody mess. Haven't hunted that spot since. I was a teenager when this happened, so around 25 years ago. My brother, I, and a friend decided to camp on this small island across the lake from where our families had summer cabins. The first night, we headed across the lake in a tiny canoe with a 5-horsepower trolling motor off the back. We get to the island, find a cool clearing, set up a tent, and start a fire. We hang out as teenagers do, smoking weed and drinking some booze we grabbed off the parents. All good. Had a great time. The next morning, we putter back across the lake to go see the parents, prove that we're not dead, and hang out at the beach all day wakeboarding, tubing, and doing stuff that you do on summer vacation. During that day, we decided that staying at the cabin is lame, so we planned to go back to the island again for a second night. Again, we grabbed some liquor, a bit of food, and some more weed, and boat across the lake to the island. The island is directly across from where the cabins are, so about 1.5 kilometers on the water to get there. So the second night, we are hanging out around the fire, doing what teens do, bragging, drinking, smoking. We had heard that there was going to be a lightning storm that night, so we decided to go down to the beach and watch the lightning storm. As we're walking down this tight, winding path with one flashlight, we all think we hear a branch break. The loud snap, of course, being teens, not 100% in their right minds at the time, our imaginations go wild. We freak out that some animal might be following us. We hop in the boat and push off from the shore. We get about 20 feet from the shore and shine the flashlight back at the shore. We all swear to this day we saw the reflection of light off a pair of eyes. So again, we freak the fuck out and scare ourselves some more. Now, we had a decision to make, and I wish I could have said we made the smart one. Instead of us going back to the island, we feel that it is better for us to go off and head across the lake, in the middle of the night, in pitch black. We take off across the lake. When we push off from the shore, we left the life jackets, paddles, and spare fuel back at the camping spot. So here, 3 teens go, racing across the lake, as this massive thunderstorm rolls in. Halfway through the middle of the lake, there are the shallows. Normally, if you take a ski boat through there, we would lift the motor and paddle through. Well, we go through there like a bat out of hell. Big waves splashing up against the side of the boat. The wind is blowing full force. And the sky is so bright with lightning, You would swear it's daytime. Halfway through the shallows, we feel a thump, and then the motor revs high and then dies. So we're about 1 kilometer from home, motor not running, and we freak out that we broke the prop. Lift the motor, find it tangled in weeds, clear these off, and lucky for us, it was fine. Just a big dent in one of the blades. Getting soaked still in the storm, we head out across the lake. Get back to the families at like 1 a.m., soaked, and just come across the lake in pitch black, other than the lightning with no life jackets or paddles. Our fathers gave a shit and called us idiots. The next day, we load up the ski boat to go recover everything we left on the island. Our dads are calling us idiots and making fun of us for doing something that stupid, and we actually thought it was something aggressive. Later on, I realized that any animal on the island was probably a beaver or muskrat, and that there was little chance that any carnivore would be on that tiny island. That night, we were worried about bears, wolves, and cougars. I think part of this could be exactly what those people experienced. I also think part of this is just being in the woods at night. It's an unsettling feeling. I have spent hundreds of evenings and dozens upon dozens of nights in the woods, far from civilization. And all the experience and all the preparation, all that being said, there are still those moments before you fall asleep where no matter how experienced you are, there's that feeling of being unsettled. I equate it to the same as when you go skydiving. If you've done it twice or 100 times, there's always a little bit of nerves before you do it, just because of what you're about to do. It doesn't mean you're afraid, it just means you're alive, I guess, right? Survival instinct? What do you think? Back in the day, they'd clear as few trees as they could to squeeze in a house. Clearly, it wasn't like that across the board, but in this story, the house was just that. Squeezed into the forest, tucked into a hill, and virtually unknown to outsiders. This is a story about a forest at night. I may have been in this particular gravel driveway, but I can matter-of-factly say I was in the woods. The moon was full, but the trees didn't really let the light in. For the characters, all you need to know is that I was babysitting, and so my sister, who's my neighbor, invited me and the kiddo for dinner. Little buddy was maybe 2 at the time. He could have been almost there. I'm a petite gal, and he was always a chonky baby. So when I hold him, I might as well be carrying a 5-year-old. Straight shot in the dark from the car to the house. Getting in was just fine. In fact, so well that I confidently walked what I thought was the same path back to the car. Nope. I get within arm's reach of the car. Little buddy is wrapped around my neck and waist. He's tired, and I'm cradling him as best I can. Whoosh. The world just kind of turned into nothing. But the same second my brain was processing in the world, just kind of flicking off, faux mama bear mode kicked in, and all thoughts went to the baby. Baby needs to be okay, especially since this mom was on her way. That's when the adrenaline kicked in, and I found myself pulling us out of the ground. My sister saw, but didn't get to me by the time I was getting out. She said I was there and just wasn't. The baby was okay. Scared, sure, but okay. They had to pry little buddy away from me because I was a little shook up, and my death grip hadn't lessened yet by the time his mom got there.